Hi, I'm Mike Sibley, leader of the James Moore manufacturing team. I'm here with Kevin Golden, one of my partners, and also a member of the James Moore manufacturing team. We are excited to have MedWorld Advisors Managing Director Dave Shepard with us on the show today. MedWorld Advisors is a M&A firm that specializes in helping small to medium-sized and probably larger now medical device and other medical-related companies with the buy and sell process. So Dave, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on again.
Thank you, Mike, for having me. Looking forward to the discussions today with you and Kevin.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a good one today. A couple weeks back, Dave and I were actually on a panel at the Florida Medical Manufacturers Consortium's 18th annual symposium. And we spoke about building intrinsic value in your company. And, while the conference was kind of focused on med tech, pretty much all the concepts apply to any business, any manufacturer. And so we thought it'd be great to take that panel and kind of bring it forward. And, Dave and his team bring so much expertise. I actually worked with Dave on a client that we jointly helped sell, and their team brought so much value to this process. And, it seems like they're always working, because I get emails in the middle of the night, and then I talk to Dave. He's like, yeah, I'm actually in Europe getting a deal done. So they're just all over the place, all over the world, getting things done.
Yeah, and you would have had one of those to sit today, but although it would have been different because I was up at 4 a.m. for one of our European calls. The good news is half of our business these days is in Europe and half is in the U.S., which makes for a nice balance, and also gives you a lot of interesting perspective when you talk about intrinsic value, about the different things that take place around the world in manufacturing companies, and some of them are very similar that are impactful, but they maybe have a greater influence in certain areas than it does in another region.
Sure. Yeah. And it's, of course, on the other hand, it's always exciting listening to some of your stories of what works, what doesn't work. So I'm really glad to get your perspective on things. And, again, before we go too far, we did talk about, one of the things we started, what is intrinsic value? And, at the conference, I kind of talked about it as, quote, the real value of the business, when you're dealing with like valuations and profitability, discounted cash flows, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of one aspect of it. But from your perspective, and as an M&A advisor, what does that mean to you? And how does that sometimes differ in reality? Or maybe it comes to reality when you're talking about market value versus intrinsic value. So how do you think of that from your perspective?
Yeah, Mike, it's a great question. And as you know from our discussion at the Florida Medical Manufacturing Group, it's really near and dear to our heart, because the intrinsic company that thinks about intrinsic value, what they're really thinking about every day is their stakeholders, right? They're thinking about stakeholders, not just the equity investors in the company, although those are very important. It's the employees, it's the vendors, it's the customers, and anybody involved in the ecosystem of that company. And how are you creating the right value for the stakeholder, every stakeholder that's involved? Because when you do that, you're actually creating an ecosystem for that company that's going to create value for you today, but also value for the future. So, for example, if you need to go get a credit line, which I'm sure in your business you get a lot involved with your clients, and how do you get that in the right way? It's important about the value that you have that the bankers might perceive that particular day. In the future, it might be you want to get a larger customer. Well, sometimes the larger customer won't take you on because they do a lot of research and say, you're just not, you don't really have your stuff together in the right way in certain areas, and those things matter. A lot of companies, especially OEM suppliers, they get audited by big companies, and if they're not ready for it, it hurts their future business. So a lot of these things play into that intrinsic value that not only creates the value today, but then also for the future. And then at the right time, what they should be thinking about is, at the point that you want to sell, and that could be next year, it could be 30 years from now, it doesn't really matter. You'll be very well positioned to have the right opportunity to take that intrinsic value and turn it into the market value at the time. You cannot control the market dynamics at any point in time. If any of us had that crystal ball, we'd probably be on a beach somewhere right now.
Right, absolutely. And so, I kind of look at it, one, I guess, to, kind of put it way simple, is if you're doing those things to make yourself, more valuable in the future, let's just say, it's going to make you a better business now. And I look at it as that also gives you leverage down the road. because
Mhm.
you're fundamentally strong and you're going into a potential deal in a very strong position in that case, as opposed to being in a weak, your business isn't running well, you just need to get out and you're just hoping somebody will actually buy it.
Right. And you go back
Yeah.
you go back to the things that people talk about what are important in the business that they look at, right? They look at market opportunity, but one of the top things is team. I don't care whether it's a VC talking about a startup or whether it's a private equity firm talking about taking a company, a middle market company that's been around for a while. And if you actually don't have that good intrinsic value, people don't even want to join your team. So then you don't even have that team to start with. So the good people attract good people, even great people, right?
Well, and Dave, like you said there, that's exactly what I was thinking. If you think of an ecosystem out in nature, what is it? It's the right conditions that attract the right people, the right things that want to be a part of that, right? Whether that's that banker, whether it's that eventual buyer, whether it's those team members that want to be a part of somebody who's got it together, right? So again, kind of the simplified way of putting it is it's the conditions, build the right conditions, right? Then the right bankers, the right uh, employees, the right vendors, the eventual right buyer is going to come along and be attracted and want to be a part of that, be a part of something that is growing, is thriving, and has a future. So,
Yeah, that's one of the things that we see over and over again is people ask us really, during this particular scenario, but in this point in time, is this a good time? Are people going to be attracted to my company? And our starting point is people are always attracted to quality companies, right? So if you're doing things the right way, they're always going to have an interest. Now, there are a lot of things that might impact in that particular year. Are you going to get the certain valuation based upon the market trends, the cost of capital, all those kind of things. And those are things why you want to pay attention to your core business and then talk to advisors, like you guys about, what is going on relative to if you need to go get a line of credit or if you want to get some investment, talk to M&A advisors that are in the market. What are the evaluations that you're seeing, the multiples? And we see a wide range of multiples, even in good times and bad times. Just for good companies. A good company, even in bad times, can get twice the multiple. Because when you see these industry, you look at PitchBook and you see these industry averages, you have to remember those are just the averages, right? So if you're a good company, you're probably
right.
going to get more than the average. If you're not a good company, you're going to get less than the average. And that's one of the challenges we get sometimes as an M&A advisor is some people aren't really quite ready. And it's a good time. Hey, people are getting 10, 15, 20x multiples. Yeah, but these companies had that intrinsic value and they got that growth rate, they got the market opportunity, and it's the right time, so they're getting that. But in your case, you guys just had a flat year. You lost a major customer, and yeah, you can get something for your company, your business, because you've established something, but may not get that same above average market multiple, right?
Right. Right. Well, and you mentioned advisor, the advisors used a lot in your role, M&A. All right. Advisor. You probably get a lot of questions. I know we get questions about, well, what exactly does an M&A advisor do? Right. I'm thinking about, or think I'm ready to sell. Right. You may tell me otherwise, but think I'm ready to sell or go down that path. So what all would you say an M&A or somebody like yourself in that advisor role does? And then when does it make sense to kind of say, okay, well, now someone like Dave or Met World Advisor, someone like that, it's time to get them involved.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, for the question. One of our starting points in talking to people that are interested in stakeholders, the equity stakeholders, and we're thinking about when's the right time for me to sell. Well, I always tell them the best time to sell is not when you need to sell, right? It's when you're ready to sell. And so if you got the time to think about it and be prepared and do it right, you'll have a much better outcome of it. If you need to sell, then you need to sell and get a good advisor, and we'll help you get the maximum value that's available. We'll do the best we can with it, and you should do a pretty good job. I'm sure other people that similar other advisors. But if you can time it where you're ready to sell, then we can, even in a down time, we can actually help you get that above average multiple. We had a company a couple of years ago that founder, the person who had the key stakeholder of the company, to say it right, he had bought the company about 25 years ago. He had built it up, and now he was 78, and he good health. He was happy running it, but his family was starting to tell him he needed to slow down a little bit, and his daughter was helping him run the company. So a good time to look at it. And so because he had time to think about it, he came to us and said, "Hey, can you just tell me where we have strengths and weaknesses in our company?" So that was the ideal scenario. So that was in the summer of 2022, and we had this whole package that we look at a business with, especially a manufacturing company, and think about, here are all the things that really where you should have in the right places. And we could send them a questionnaire, we got their answers, and we start talking to them about, okay, ideally, this is where you want to be in all these different functional categories and parts of the business. And so by the time in 23, when he was getting ready to sell, he really was ready to sell. And so we were able to take this company that I think he would have got a good value at any time. He had built a good quality company to start with, but by maximizing each of these functional areas and make sure he was ready to sell, he ended up getting an outcome that wildly exceeded his family's expectations.
Right. Well, and I think what you talk about there is readiness, right? Obviously, he was ready. I heard some keywords there. He had time, right? I always like to say that. And whatever you're doing, whatever you're planning for, I like having options, right? I like when people give me options. So don't paint yourself in a corner where now, like you said, it's not I have to sell, but that I'm ready to sell. So going around that topic of being ready, having readiness, what do you see maybe as some common pitfalls or misconceptions about what that really means when someone says, "Yeah, I'm ready to sell. I think I'm ready to go," and you're like, "Well, maybe not. Maybe we need to slow down. Maybe we need that time to think about it." Give some people an idea of maybe what some of the common misconceptions about what that means is, and what business owners can do and manufacturing owners can do now to maybe put themselves in a better position to really be ready to have that conversation.
Yeah. So I think probably the strongest misconception is somebody says, "Hey, I really had a good profit last year, right? And so I should be ready to sell." Well, I see Mike shaking his head because what does profit really mean? Because you can have a good profit and a really crappy cash flow. you know you can
Right.
you can have a good profit and not have a really good EBITDA. There's just a lot of things that go into that equation. So what you really need to understand is, for the business that you have, and in this case we're talking about manufacturing companies, how am I going to be valued? Because if you're really thinking about getting ready to sell, and what's going to maximize that value that I have, so you start thinking of these different areas. The customers, like in one case, we had somebody who really had a great EBITDA, and he's looking at the industry averages and say, "Hey, maybe I can even get above average in that." But his customer concentration was so high, there was no way that he was ever going to get above average multiple. He was actually lucky to get an offer. And the offer would not come really so much from private equity. It would come from an industry competitor that wanted to take on maybe that customer concentration. It wasn't so big to them because they had 10 other customers, and that 11th customer that was big for the one smaller company could fit in. But that's really where the misconceptions come sometimes. Is you focus on one thing and you think, okay, I got a good profit.
Right.
Well, I can go sell my company. Well, maybe, but let's look at the rest of it to make sure.
Well, and the
Yeah.
reason I was so vigorously shaking my head is I see that a lot, where you say you had this one great year, so let's get out. Well,
Yeah.
here's the thing, right? If you're all of a sudden starting to get back to maybe normal, maybe you had one good year, you had one customer, had one big contract, whatever it might be, but now you're going back to more your normal range, you're going to lose the value. You're not getting the full value of that. These buyers are going to come in and probably flatten that out. They're going to look at, where is your forecast going? They're going to look at a lot of things. And I haven't seen it. Maybe you have, Dave. I haven't seen it where somebody had one good year, a blip on the screen, and got a full value on that blip. And that's what I see quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's another reason why they should hire good advisors like you guys and candidly us, because we get deal after deal. We'll get these private equity firms in, and we pride ourselves. We get above market multiples for our clients. We every single time that we've done in the last 10 years. But the challenge is that it's not just about letting the buyer come in and take over and say, okay, I see your multiple, I'm going to give you this thing. They always tell you, I'm going to give you 8 to 10x, but that's the industry. Okay, well, you can offer that, but that's not what you're going to pay for this company, because this company is ready and it doesn't have to sell right now. So it's really important to understand the leverage that you have also when you're in the situation, and that one good year gives you something to talk about. It gets some interest, so that makes it fun.
Right.
And the good news is, if you've had a couple of good years, then you might be able to bank on it if you can show that go forward. And that's just what you guys are helpful with, kind of just talk about the pro forma, and you can't, nobody has a crystal ball, but you can have some reasonable, educated guesses about where it's going based on where the customers are and that sort of thing. Then you have something that shows consistency, that you can really push the buyer on where I should be. But these firms, so what they'll do in diligence, they'll hire this Ernst & Young or PwC to do audits like that, and they'll ask you, here in 2025, it's a recent one, they were asking for stuff for a recent deal for 2018 and 2019, and we just said no, thank you, that's not relevant, right? If you want this company, you had 2018, 2019, then you had COVID. Nobody can count what happened in COVID, and then 21 started recovery, 22. So it's really around 23, 24, 25, and what's going to happen 26, 27, and the market opportunity, and then the rest of that intrinsic value that you have. And so you need people like us to push back on your behalf, to say, so you're not the bad, let us be the bad guy, and say, that you're wasting people's time if you can focus on what happened in 2017 in July, right?
Yeah, and I will say you guys do an absolute great job of that. It was great having you part of the team to be able to say, listen, they're getting a little bit out of bounds here. Let's let everybody on the same page, and you guys do a great job of that. Jumping into the readiness, though, I think this is probably one of the most important points in this whole discussion is the transition planning, the planning time to say, hey, I'm ready to go right now. Well, are you? Because, let's go back to your example of, hey, I've now had 2 good years. Okay, now I'm starting to feel a little better about 2 good years. But, in due diligence, they're going to say, show me your pipeline. How prove to me that you feel good that we're going to not only repeat, but even improve on this number. How do you get there? How do you measure your pipeline? How do you get that confidence level? So they're going to really drill you on what the future looks like and how you build into that. So your readiness is not just about having good financial statements and a good IT system and a good team. It's also showing that we have the ability to continue this growth, and here's how. And I think a lot of times that gets missed in what a company is thinking about.
Yeah, because it's nice to get an offer based upon your historicals, but candidly, buyers, they're not buying your history. It's giving them confidence there could be a future, but really what they're buying is the future, and they'll give you a better multiple the more confidence they have in the future, right? That's really what this is all about. To your point, and also in manufacturing companies specifically, as we're talking about, it's not only that continued trajectory in terms of growth, in terms of revenue, but it's also, as you know, margin growth. What are you doing to improve, even a quarter point, half point on your margins? Because that all falls down to the bottom line.
Right. Well, I mean, let's face it. Nobody buys anything. Nobody invests in a company to see no rate of return. So in other words, we've got to have the ability for EBITDA and our everything profitability to increase, because if not, what are they getting out of it? Right. Yep. So that's the goal.
Well, and even like you said, Dave, as I'm hearing all this, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, well, you got to have all of these are all different data points, right? Whether it's profit, EBITDA, whether it's cash flow, all these other items. It's hey, do all these kind of stars line? I'm thinking, well, golly, no company's perfect, right? I think that sometimes even helps out as well, and say, hey, yeah, this was a time period that maybe we did have some struggles, some growing pains or whatnot. Here's how we overcame that, because we can easily tell that story that then shows, well, yeah, even through adversity, here's how they overcame. Here's how they figured that out. Here's how they sustained through it. So I agree with you. To some point, we have to make sure that it's within the, does this really matter? Going back too far, for example, doesn't. But at the same time, I know we've had discussions and due diligence with people buying our clients that they have had a period of time where maybe, the stars all didn't align, but being able to tell that story,
Yep.
being able to show the metrics and what you've done, process, procedure, everything gets back to the, what do you call that, confidence or that comfort level. And that's buyers want. Now they feel confident. I can take this on in the future. I can get the return I want to, and even more so, I can increase that and make that even more profitable going forward.
Yeah, Kevin, that's really a good point. Because we're talking about intrinsic value, and we're trying to create this perception that you can have everything perfect. You don't, right? But you need to understand where it is good and where it's not, and then you'd have a story around. Okay, my team might be a little weaker right now in Asia because I just had to fire my Hong Kong distributor because they really weren't performing. Because I thought they're going to help me in China, but China's changed and whatever. But you recognize it and you do it and you're addressing that. So here's how my Asia has been. Here's where I can go with it. And people understand that every company is going to have some strengths and weaknesses. The question is, do you understand them? And if you do, if you can tell the story about where you're at and where that's going to go, that, to your point, just continues to increase the confidence about the future and working together.
Good point. Good point. Let's switch gears a little bit here. I saw an article recently talking about, the M&A market with all these tariffs had maybe got a little bit slow or maybe stop, kind of got sold the roll a little bit, but now I guess, starting to see some M&A activity rebounding with all the tariff talk. And of course, we just had a tariff thing recently with a court ruling come out here. So things are always in the news about tariffs these days, but I know we kind of said earlier, you're traveling the world, seeing deals. What are you seeing in terms of M&A activity?
Yeah, so it's an interesting perspective for us because we actually have done deals in Central Europe, Northern Europe, UK, which I don't know, is that Europe or not? It's the debate these days, and then also the US. And what we're seeing right now is first and foremost, what people need to understand is this dry powder everybody's talked about. It's still there, right? People may not be throwing offers on the table this particular quarter ever since Liberation Day on April 2nd, because financial people, as you know, because you guys are finance guys, and you work a lot of banks, I'm sure. They love good news, so they're happy to throw everybody's all in on good news. We're going to get a higher return or whatever. They can even deal with bad news because they can pencil it into their formula and figure out, okay, if that's my risk, this bad news, then I can handle that, and then they measure it and work with it. Where they really are challenged is the environment of uncertainty. So what we're seeing right now is, as far as companies reaching out to us, hey, Dave, do you have a client that we could buy? That activity is as strong as it ever can be. And that doesn't matter if it's in Germany, Nordics, UK, US, that is there. Now, what's not happening is, hey, we're ready to write the check just yet. Because what they don't know right now, until this court thing gets resolved or the July 9th thing gets resolved, whichever comes first, or maybe even later, right? Is they just need to know, okay, are we going to be in this world of 10% tariffs forever? Are we going to be 50% or whatever? And then they can pencil it in and they can go on and they can make decisions. So it's a little bit more challenging right now for us with our U.S. clients. What's interesting for us, because we have our European business, we're getting a lot more interest in companies that had been thinking about coming to the U.S. And now they're wanting to come and find a partner here in the U.S. to work with, so that they can. Probably in most companies' strategy, it was already there. Now what they're doing is they're accelerating it, and that's the conversation we're having. Is how can we help them find a partner in the U.S. to accelerate that? So our European business is actually taking a very positive momentum forward because of that. U.S. is a little bit. The activity interest is there, but the actual offers are going to probably come into the second half of the year once there gets a little more certainty about what is the playground, right?
Yeah, right. I'm seeing that actually a lot as I talk to my clients about planning, whether we're talking about pricing on products, inventory needs, all these different things. And there seems to be a common thought process that, hey, I think in a few more months or so, all of this will level out.
Yeah.
That it'll calm down. Maybe some of it will go away. I don't know to what degree, right? But I think there's this sense, and I assume that's kind of what in the M&A process. Hey, let's find something. Let's get started, because this process takes a while anyway. So right. Maybe by the time we work through all this, it'll be. Is that kind of the sense that you're seeing too?
Yeah, exactly right. So you wouldn't want to be in a U.S. process where this quarter was a quarter where you had to have your offer. That would have been that would have. I'm sure there's
Right.
people there, and I'm sure it would be a challenge for them. But we did have a situation in the first quarter where we had a European company on the market, but international European company. And we had buyers that were interested from the U.S. We had buyers from UK and then also from Europe on them, and giving those above market average the multiples that we were talking about. So interesting situation about making sure that you're ready and intrinsic value. The reason why this company decided to go to market was two of their biggest industry competitors reached out to them and said, hey, you guys, we've kind of been noticing you over there in the corner. You've been innovating. We're not your big company. We're not innovating. You guys are grabbing market share from us. You're starting to annoy us a little bit. So we want to buy you. And so the key equity holder came to me and said, hey, Dave, these guys, this is last summer. Like, hey, do you think we should run a process right now? And I said, well, I think so, but let's look at some things in your business because we need to make sure that you can withstand a full process. Because a full process is not just talking to the business unit leader at that big company what his offer is. It's about making sure that when you get into diligence, first when you get LA executed, that you're not leaving money on the table. Because if you don't need to sell, you want to make sure that you're not leaving money on the table. So let's just run a process, see who else might be interested out there, and then you're not leaving any money on the table. So anyway, so we went to so we found out, we checked the company out, felt quality, ready to sell, and so we ran a process. The timing in the process, the two big companies had other major events happening in the company, completely unrelated to this company, but both of them backed out because of timing. So if they had just decided to sell because they were going to sell to one of these, they would have been out of the deal. But the reality was we were able to run a process. So we had buyers from UK, Europe, and US interested in them in Q1, and things were really going well, and none of the tariff stuff was going on. And we were down to final LOI phase the week of Liberation Day, which is a Wednesday, right? And so on Monday, we had European interest and U.S. interest. By Friday, we still had that, but the U.S. became a little bit less certain what they wanted to do because of what happened on Wednesday. Because now all of a sudden they don't really know what was going to happen with their money and all that. The good news was the European company was a little bit stronger to begin with anyway, so then it just made sense. Let's go ahead and consolidate that deal because we're not sure where the U.S. people are going to be right now, and that turned out to be a good thing to do. Now, in the meantime, talking about intrinsic value, so then intrinsic value paid off for them because they withstood the fact that two major strategics backed out, and they got just as good an offer as they could have from a private equity company who wants to take them as a platform. But then now what's been going on is their international company, international deal, you can imagine there's a lot of exchange rates that's going on relative to their business. And so that's causing some fluctuation in their performance to budget, not their actual performance, but their performance to budget because of how the exchange rates impact it. And so what we've been going through right now and getting the deal to over the finish line, in fact, I was on my 4 a.m. call this morning, was reviewing with the buyer who still is very interested in doing this deal because they see it as a quality company they want to participate with, but they have to get the banker to approve the deal, right? And they got to get their investment committee to approve the deal. And so the buyers are trying to understand what's the real story of why we're not performing to budget. And what they were able to actually show is the only delta from their performance was that exchange rate. So then now they're forcing so I talked to the seller about it. We need to help them understand that you are still who you are. Now the buyer wants to participate with you because they see what the future can be. Now you're forcing them to make a decision based upon that they actually know the story they can tell the banker, right? And so they were able to do that very well this morning. So now we're going back. We'll see where the final result is, but I have very high confidence coming out of that meeting that intrinsic value showed up in that review because the only thing that created that delta to performance was the foreign exchange, which the buyer admitted the seller cannot control, right?
Yeah, that's a great story of how important it is to be working with your advisors, working with everybody to try to get that through. But I think there's there's so many pieces in there that show just that's what it is. But one of the things I always talk about when a client comes to me and they say, hey, a big competitor of mine wants to put an offer on our business, and the first thing I always say is, well, before we do that, let's run a process to see, make sure their offer is in the ballpark, or maybe
Yeah.
if you're going to sell your business, let's see if maybe there's not a better opportunity out there. Yes, it could be easy, but then again, they could get into it. They learn a bunch about you, and yes, they've signed a whole bunch of agreements and NDAs and all that kind of stuff, but they may not want you after that, after they get into it. But if you were really interested in selling, let's look at this.
Right. And so we had that scenario in that company that I talked about, where we talked to him in 2022 about getting ready. And so when we
Right.
in 2023, when we got ready to start the process, he handed me a business card of a private equity firm that had been chasing him for 20 years. And he said, "Hey, Dave, I know you're going to run your process, and I want you to, because you've convinced me that that's the way to find out if we're not leaving the money behind. But these guys are going to buy us. I just know it, right? Well, we ended up selling that company. I won't go into the exact amount, but it was nine figures. It was over $100 million, and that company that he said was going to buy him never got over 75. And that's why you need to run a process, because the range in that deal was from like $60 million offers to over $110 million offers, right? And a deal that we did in Europe, a deal that we did in Europe earlier last year, the delta was between 30 million and 70 million. So how do you, as a seller who doesn't run a process, how do you know, are you getting the $30 million offer, or are you getting the $70 million offer? You really need to have somebody by your side helping you make sure you understand that you're not leaving anything behind.
Such an important point to note there. I think that's super, super critical. I'm glad that came up, because I think that's a really critical point.
Yeah. Well, and Dave, we're advisors, right? You're an advisor, attorneys, other close family members, mentors, whoever it may be, are advisors to them. With so many different people giving advice and so forth, especially, I mean, these are transactions that, unless you're a serial entrepreneur, if you're turning over companies constantly, you're probably doing this maybe 1 to 3 times in your lifetime as a business owner, right? It doesn't happen every day. So you get all these advice. Oh, here's what I would do. Here's what I'd look at. Hey, we should look at another, company, kind of know where this falls in between. How do you find that juggling between yourself and what you bring to the table, knowing what their other advisors, whether it's someone like ourselves or someone else, brings to the table? How do you juggle working all that together, coming at it from slightly different angles to ultimately get to, okay, here's what the best answer is for you, your company, and how we should, move forward during that M&A process?
Yeah, Kevin, that's an excellent point. We are so excited when we're working with an equity owner, sometimes the CEO, sometimes the chairman, whatever it might be, that recognizes the value of advisors, because the more people around the table that actually have been through this before and that understand the process, the more value that equity team, those stakeholders are they're going to get. Because when I talk to you, Kevin, you Mike, and maybe we might talk to John, the attorney down the street that we all know, those equity holders are going to get different types of advice, because we all come from different functional areas, but they're going to get similar type of advice that they need to hear, and it's going to actually help them run a better process. And assuming that you have the right advisors, we're all going to be able to work together to help create the value, to get the right offers to start with. And then through that diligence process, which really becomes very challenging and cumbersome at times, because they're hiring these PwCs and EYs, and they're paid to try to figure out what they can find in the closet number 2 or 3 or whatever. We can just help when things come up. Yep. That happened, and here's the explanation. Here's the story. You don't have to panic, Mr. Business Owner that's trying to sell your business. This is the natural thing. These guys over here, at these other firms, the auditor firms, they're paid to find stuff, right? So it's just we can help you get through that. So unless you were doing something that was fraudulent or whatever, it's all going to be okay. And we're all working together to tell the same story, and making sure they're prepared to tell the proper story. That also is helpful for them.
Yeah, it may. Obviously, this is what we do, right? We bring our expertise into it. It can kind of sound a little bit self-serving, but I've worked with Dave and the attorney, for example, that we were just talking about, and we were nights, weekends, holidays, whatever we need to do with the CEO of the company, trying to make sure that we were getting everything going the right way, because he saw the value of what we brought. And I think sometimes owners will try to bring us in piecemeal here and there just to get through this step or that. and it ends up making for a lumpy transaction. You're not necessarily going to get the best advice and get the best way. And yes, you might save a little bit of fees here, but you sometimes lose on it on the other end, and so much can go wrong, especially if a deal dies because of various problems that advisors could have helped with. So I think it's it's important to, no matter who you use, it's important to use your advisors, get that team going, and work with that team carefully.
Yeah, and some of the best business owners we work with actually have been through a sell process or two before, because they actually understand what it takes to get through it and get through it successfully, and they understand that there's times when you're the seller, that buyer is going to tick you off. They're just going to make you mad. And if you let that get to you personally, into your emotional IQ, your emotional quotient on that, it could actually hurt your deal, and you don't want it to hurt your deal and for your stakeholders. So let Shepard take it on, or let Mike take it on, or Kevin. Well, there's several times in a process, in every process, because no two are ever the same exactly, but there is some point in every single one of them that I'll end up having a conversation with the buyer and say, hey, I know those PwC guys mean well, but they're a couple of years out. They're a couple of years out of school, because those are the ones they put on the audit teams, right? They've never run a business now, and you put them on a trail, and they think they're hunting something, but they're not really hunting anything. So what do you really need? And let's cut the and let's get to the heart of what you need, and then so our seller can move forward and get you to that point, because we know nobody wants to misrepresent anything. We want to make sure there's clarity on that, but we don't want you as a buyer, you don't want to tick off that seller, because because they're ready to sell, but they don't need to sell. We don't have to sell TSA, so let's work together here, right?
Right. Great point. Hey, so Dave, we keep talking. We could talk all day on this, but we got we're kind of getting to the point where we're going to wrap up here. But just final question: if there's one piece of advice you could give to a manufacturing business thinking about the future of their company, what would it be? I know there's a million things you could probably say here, and we could talk until tomorrow morning on it. But if you had to kind of just pick one thing, what would it be?
Yeah, in terms of thinking about the intrinsic value or the future market value of the company?
Just the future, the market value, the best way, assuming that this person's going to put their business on the market at some point.
Yeah, so I think the best piece of advice to do is, first of all, is feel good about what you're doing, the business that you're in, because when you're in business, we've all been in business in a lot of different ways. It's a lot of work. I don't care which business you have, and if you're in manufacturing, it's even more work. And with all respect to people in service, because we're in service, right? And we do work 24/7 to help our clients and all that. But manufacturing is tough. I mean, you get hit by these things that you didn't expect. You get the COVID, you get the supply chain things, you get the tariffs, you get the margin points, the margin hits. You get all of a sudden think everything's fine, and then all of a sudden your biggest customer is demanding a 25% cost down and all that. So first of all, you just get comfortable that you're enjoying the business that you're in. And if there's certain parts of the business that you don't enjoy as much, get good people to manage those parts of the business for you, so they can take away the not so fun part, so you could enjoy what you're doing, because business really is fun when you're doing it the right way. And as you're building the team and building that intrinsic value, you actually can start to have more fun with your business, and you can enjoy each day, each month, each year, as you're growing the company to the point that you are ready to sell. Not that you have to sell, but that you're ready to sell. I think that'd be my piece of advice.
Great advice. Dave, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time with us today. I'm sure our listeners will also appreciate it. For everybody listening and watching, we always appreciate your time. Hope you get value out of this. We enjoy covering this, but as always, if you have questions or things that we can do to help your business, please give us a call. Again, thank you for your time. Hope you guys have a great day.
To learn more about James Moore and Company's manufacturing services, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our More on Manufacturing series to receive updates when new videos and podcasts are released. If you'd like to be a guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see covered on a future episode, contact us on our website. You can also follow us on social media for more news as the landscape on manufacturing continues to rapidly evolve.